What if the coffee sitting in your cupboard right now has been lying to you for years? Not about the price tag, about what's actually hiding inside that jar. Before we go any further, do me one favor, tap that like button right now before you even know everything that's coming, because by the end of this video, you are going to want to send it to every single coffee drinker you know. And if you have never subscribed to a channel because of a coffee video before, today might just be the day that changes. Let's start with the bigger picture. Coffee is one of the most loved drinks in this country. Almost every kitchen has a jar of it somewhere. Some people genuinely cannot function in the morning without it. It is comfort. It is routine. It is the first decision most of us make every single day. But somewhere along the way, the companies we trusted with that morning ritual quietly stopped trying to make good coffee and started focusing entirely on making good profit. Those two goals are not the same thing, and once you understand how they pulled this off, you will never look at your morning cup the same way again. Let's talk numbers first, because numbers do not lie even when the packaging does. In 2025, one of Britain's most recognized coffee brands raised its price by around 40%. At the very same time, without telling a single customer, it quietly reduced the amount of coffee inside the jar. Same jar shape, same shelf space, same logo, less actual product inside. Higher price on the sticker. That is not simple inflation catching up with costs. That is a calculated bet that you are too busy, too loyal, or too trusting to ever check the weight printed in small letters on the label. And it gets worse from there. Researchers in the UK tested dozens of coffee products that were proudly labelled as 100% Arabica, the premium bean that coffee lovers specifically search for and pay extra to get. A large number of those products were not telling the truth. Some samples were secretly blended with Robusta, the cheaper, harsher bean that is normally reserved for the bottom shelf of budget instant coffee. You were paying full Arabica prices for what was, in reality, closer to a Robusta experience, and absolutely nothing printed on that jar ever told you that. Then there is the part nobody wants to bring up over breakfast. Some instant coffees carry roughly double the level of a compound called acrylamide compared to fresh ground coffee. This compound forms naturally during high heat processing, and health authorities have flagged it as something worth limiting in our overall diet. This is not meant to make you panic over your morning cup, but it is absolutely a fair question to ask why some brands carry so much more of it than others and why none of them ever mention it on the front of the packet. And then there is the part of this story that has nothing to do with what is in your cup and everything to do with what happens after you finish drinking it. Every single minute, somewhere around the world, tens of thousands of coffee pods are thrown straight into landfill, not recycled, not reused, buried in the ground. Those little plastic and aluminium pods can take roughly 500 years to fully break down. 5 centuries of waste sitting underground, created for 5 minutes of convenience, repeated every single day by millions of people who have absolutely no idea that this is the trade they are quietly making. So today we are going through 9 coffee products currently sitting on UK supermarket shelves that deserve a much harder look before you put them in your trolley again. After that, I am going to show you 3 options that genuinely deserve your money. Brands that prove good coffee does not have to cost more. It simply has to be made by people who actually care about the cup at the end of the process, not just the marketing campaign around it. Let's start with number 9. The supermarket range, carrying that famous green mermaid logo, promising the coffee shop experience recreated inside your own kitchen. Here is what most people genuinely do not know about this one. The company actually manufacturing that coffee for supermarket shelves is not the coffee shop chain itself. Years ago, a massive global food company paid billions of dollars purely for the rights to put that famous name on supermarket products sold around the world. That means when you pick up that bag at the supermarket, you are not buying anything made the way your local branch makes it fresh behind the counter. You are buying a product manufactured on the exact same industrial production lines used for budget instant coffee, just wrapped in far more expensive-looking packaging. The freshness, the grinding, the brewing within minutes that defines the actual cafe experience, none of that travels into that bag sitting on the shelf. You are essentially paying for a memory of a coffee shop, not for an equivalent cup of coffee, and the flavored sachets in that same range are arguably worse than they first appear. Some of the caramel and vanilla flavored options can carry close to a third of your entire recommended daily sugar intake inside a single small sachet. Most people naturally use 2 sachets to get a cup that actually feels worth drinking, which means before you have even eaten breakfast, you could already be close to your entire daily sugar allowance from one drink. That is not a small treat. That is a sugar load disguised as a comforting cup of coffee. Number 8 is the gold jar that has been sitting in British kitchens for generations, the instant coffee almost everybody's parents drank, and quite possibly their grandparents too. There is a reason people keep reaching for it without thinking twice. It feels familiar. It feels safe. It feels like home. But across review sites and supermarket comment sections, thousands of long-term buyers have started noticing the exact same thing. It does not taste like it used to taste. That is not simple nostalgia talking. The pricing on this brand jumped sharply in recent years, but absolutely nothing about the quality improved to justify that jump. At the very same time, the actual amount of coffee inside the jar quietly shrank, even though the jar on the outside stayed exactly the same familiar size. That gap between what your eyes see on the shelf and what actually ends up in your cupboard is precisely where they are making their extra money, and they are counting entirely on the fact that most loyal customers never weigh their coffee before buying it again out of habit. The processing method used here matters just as much as the quantity. This brand relies on the cheapest, fastest drying method available in the entire industry, a method that strips out delicate flavor compounds within seconds of processing. A far better method exists. It takes close to a full day to complete properly, and it actually protects and preserves the taste that makes coffee worth drinking in the first place. This brand chose speed and cost saving over quality every single time, and you are the one left tasting that decision every morning. And many of their blends quietly mix in the cheaper, harsher bean instead of relying purely on premium beans, even while their marketing leans heavily on words like tradition, quality, and heritage. That cheaper bean naturally carries nearly double the caffeine of the premium variety, but absolutely none of the smoothness that people are actually hoping to taste in their cup. Number 7 is a brand that proudly markets itself as whole bean instant coffee, suggesting you are getting something genuinely close to real ground coffee inside a convenient instant jar. The reality is far less impressive than the label suggests. The overwhelming majority of what is actually inside, somewhere around 85%, is plain, ordinary instant coffee. Only a small remaining slice is genuine roast and ground coffee. That is not a thoughtful blend designed around flavor balance. That is a small amount of real coffee added purely so the marketing department has something honest sounding to point toward on the packaging. This particular brand is owned by one of the largest coffee companies on the entire planet, a company processing billions of cups of coffee every single year across dozens of countries. At that kind of industrial scale, individual quality control on any single jar quietly disappears into the machine. The packaging still whispers words like heritage and craftsmanship, the exact same language used a century ago when this brand started life as a small boutique shop selling carefully selected quality beans. That history is genuinely real. It is simply no longer connected in any meaningful way to what actually ends up inside the jar today. Their environmental claims look impressive on the surface too, but the certification they actually rely on is a noticeably weaker standard compared to the one most shoppers picture when they hear the words ethical sourcing on a label. There is no real way to trace your particular coffee back to one specific farm. It is responsible-sounding language without much real substance sitting behind it. Let's pause here for a moment. If this is the first time you are realizing just how much these companies have been hiding comfortably behind clever marketing language, that is exactly why this video needs to reach more people than just you. Do not simply like it and move on. Actually share it right now with one person you know who drinks coffee every single day. They deserve to know all of this too. Number 6 takes us to the same parent brand as before, just dressed up in a darker, more premium-looking jar with the word barista printed boldly across the front. The price jumps noticeably higher than their standard range sitting right next to it on the shelf. For that price increase, what you are actually getting is somewhere around 5% genuine ground coffee. The remaining 95% is plain instant, padded out further with fillers like maltodextrin, glucose syrup, and vegetable oils, ingredients that have absolutely nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with cheaply bulking out a product. This is the same parent company creating dozens of different jars across their range, each one promising a slightly different flavor experience, a slightly different feeling when you take that first sip. But in genuine blind taste comparisons, people consistently struggle to tell most of these variants apart from one another. It is essentially the same underlying coffee, repackaged again and again, climbing steadily in price each time the label gets a little more sophisticated. You are not actually paying for meaningfully better coffee as you move up through their range. You are paying for increasingly clever packaging design wrapped around a very similar product. Number 5 is where pod coffee starts to get genuinely concerning. Some of the most popular latte-style pod systems on the market use two completely separate pods, one purely for coffee, one purely for milk. That milk pod is not fresh milk in any sense of the word. It is milk powder mixed together with added sugar, sometimes making up around 10% of that single pod's entire content. You are effectively paying coffee shop level prices for reconstituted powdered milk delivered through a plastic capsule. The actual coffee pod itself often contains only a tiny amount of real coffee, sometimes just a handful of grams, for a price that can genuinely rival or even beat buying proper fresh ground coffee by the cup. The entire system is built carefully around the feeling of making coffee, that satisfying click as the pod locks firmly into place, the gentle hum of the machine warming up, rather than around the actual quality of what eventually comes out into your cup. And this brings us directly back to that bigger problem hiding behind almost every pod system on this entire list. Tens of thousands of pods thrown straight into the bin every single minute around the world, with the vast majority never making it anywhere near a proper recycling facility, simply because the entire collection process is inconvenient enough that most ordinary people never bother going through with it. The companies behind these systems know this perfectly well. They print a recycling logo on the box anyway and call it a day. Number 4 takes that exact same underlying problem and adds vendor lock-in directly on top of it. Certain disk-based coffee pod systems use proprietary disks fitted with built-in barcodes that only function correctly inside their own specific branded machines. Once you own one of these machines, you genuinely cannot switch over to a cheaper alternative pod, even if you wanted to. You are locked into paying premium prices indefinitely, sometimes for what essentially amounts to little more than instant coffee wrapped inside fancy-looking packaging. Many of their milky drink options rely on soluble coffee rather than anything actually brewed fresh, and the plastic discs themselves are even harder to properly recycle than standard aluminium pods, thanks to the mix of plastic material and built-in electronic barcoding involved in their design. Number 3 brings us to easily the most visually appealing option anywhere on this entire list. The famous aluminium pod system, known worldwide for its sleek-looking machines and high-profile celebrity advertising campaigns. It successfully built an entire image around effortless sophistication and quiet luxury. But hiding behind that polished image sits one of the most genuinely wasteful products you will find in any kitchen. Those aluminium pods can take roughly 500 years to fully break down once buried. Despite years and years of dedicated recycling promotion, independent reporting has consistently found that a clear majority of these pods in the UK still end up sitting in landfill rather than ever reaching a recycling facility, simply because the collection process itself is confusing or inconvenient enough that ordinary people eventually give up trying. Even the small percentage of pods that genuinely do get recycled travel an almost absurd distance to get there, crossing through multiple different countries for cleaning, then melting, then reshaping, then reforming all over again, racking up significant transportation emissions at every single stage of that long journey. And mining the raw aluminium itself, well before it ever becomes a single pod, produces an enormous amount of waste relative to the actual metal extracted from the ground. Every cup you drink from one of these elegant-looking machines carries an environmental cost that has very little to do with the coffee itself and almost everything to do with the material it happens to be wrapped inside. Number 2 on this list is a budget ground coffee marketed heavily around strength and boldness, using a clearly printed number scale to suggest raw power and serious intensity. Here is the part the label conveniently never explains to you. Roasting coffee beans extremely dark, right to the point where they are almost burnt, is one of the oldest tricks in the entire coffee industry for successfully hiding low-quality beans underneath. Once beans are roasted that aggressively, almost any flaw hiding inside the original beans disappears completely under a thick wall of bitterness and smoke. You are not actually tasting boldness here. You are tasting concealment dressed up as strength. There is no visible ethical certification anywhere on this particular product either, nothing at all suggesting these beans were sourced according to any meaningful standard beyond simply hitting the lowest possible price point available. And finally, number 1 on our list is a different instant coffee brand that leans extremely heavily on intensity throughout its entire marketing, promising deep, powerful flavor complete with notes of smoke and black pepper. In reality, this is the exact same dark roast trick we just covered, simply presented in instant form this time, paired together with a strength rating that genuinely only measures roast level and caffeine content, never actual quality. A high-strength number built from genuinely low-grade beans is still, at the end of the day, low-grade coffee. It is simply more intensely low-grade than before. Now here is where this entire video gets genuinely exciting. Because after working through 9 products you should think twice about buying, the obvious next question is whether good, honest coffee even still exists anywhere on UK supermarket shelves at a fair price. It absolutely does exist. And the good news is, you do not need to spend more money to find it. You simply need to stop spending on brands that have been quietly cutting corners for years, while counting heavily on your loyalty to keep buying anyway. Before we get into the 3 brands that actually deserve your money, if you have made it this far into the video, you clearly care about knowing exactly what you are putting into your body every single morning. So do something simple for me right now. Drop a comment below with the name of any food or drink brand you genuinely want investigated next. I read every single comment, and the next video on this channel might very well be built entirely around your idea. First, look closely at supermarket-owned brand Fairtrade instant coffee, specifically the higher-end ranges sold by major UK supermarkets. In a recent large-scale blind taste test involving dozens of everyday coffee drinkers, one particular supermarket's own premium Fairtrade instant coffee came out right at the very top, beating multiple famous, heavily advertised brands sitting right next to it on the shelf. It costs noticeably less per 100 grams than those bigger, more famous names. Testers consistently described it as smooth and balanced, with gentle hints of chocolate and caramel running through it. It carries proper fair trade certification, the genuinely stronger standard built around verified farmer payments and fully transparent supply chains, not the weaker label that several big brands quietly rely on instead. And crucially, it is made using that slower, gentler drying process that actually preserves real flavor, rather than the cheap, fast method that strips flavor away within seconds. This single jar alone proves that a supermarket can comfortably outperform decades of advertising budget simply by genuinely caring about the product first. Second, look specifically for any supermarket whose entire own brand range carries full fair trade certification across every single product, not just one flagship item wheeled out purely for marketing photos. That kind of company-wide commitment tells you something real and meaningful about where their priorities actually sit. The coffee itself tends to deliver a smooth, genuinely full-bodied character without the harsh bitterness that plagues so many cheaper, mass-market alternatives sitting nearby on the shelf. It is solid proof that quality and ethics are not opposites pulling against each other. You can genuinely have both without ever paying a steep premium purely for a famous logo printed on the front. Third, do not overlook the discount supermarkets entirely. Not every budget coffee on the shelf is created equally. Some discount-own brand instant coffees have scored remarkably close to the most expensive premium options in independent taste tests, all while costing a genuine fraction of the price. You can often tell whether a coffee has been properly freeze-dried just by gently shaking the closed jar. Large, irregular-looking crystals generally mean it was freeze-dried, the better, more expensive method. Fine, uniform-looking powder usually means it was spray-dried instead, the cheaper, faster method. Some discount brands genuinely choose the better process anyway, not because it lets them charge more money, but simply because it actually produces noticeably better coffee. That is a brand quietly spending its money on the actual product instead of pouring it into an expensive advertising campaign. And if you personally prefer ground coffee over instant, look specifically for smaller ethical brands where farmers actually hold real ownership stakes in the company itself, where sourcing is fully traceable right back to named individual farms, and where the clear majority of trade happens directly with growers, cutting out the middlemen who usually take the largest cut along the way. These brands tend to cost roughly the same as mid-range supermarket options sitting nearby, but the money you spend is actually reaching the people who genuinely grew your coffee instead of quietly disappearing into someone else's marketing budget. Here is the bigger truth quietly sitting underneath everything we have talked through together today. Good coffee has never genuinely required more money. It simply requires more honesty. For decades, the big brands successfully convinced all of us that a famous name printed on the jar meant guaranteed quality, that a longer brand history meant higher standards, that prettier, more expensive-looking packaging automatically meant a better cup waiting inside. None of that was ever actually true. Supermarket-owned brands are quietly beating them in genuine blind taste tests. Discount brands are matching premium-level quality at a genuine fraction of the price. And small, transparent companies are proving every single day that you can pay farmers fairly, source everything honestly, and still keep prices completely reasonable for everyday shoppers. The only thing the big names have consistently, reliably been excellent at all this time is marketing. And marketing, no matter how clever or expensive it looks, is simply not something you can actually drink. Coffee is. So the next time you are standing in that supermarket aisle staring at the shelf, do not automatically reach for the jar simply because it feels familiar. Do not reach for it purely because your parents drank it for years, or because the packaging looks expensive, or because some celebrity's smiling face happens to be printed on the box. Pick it up properly. Read the actual ingredients list printed on the back. Check the real weight against the real price. Ask yourself honestly what you are actually paying for in that moment. The brands covered on this list today have spent years quietly counting on the simple fact that you would never look closely enough to notice. Every single minute they get away with it, somewhere a jar gets a little bit smaller, a price tag climbs a little bit higher, and another 500 years of plastic or aluminium waste gets quietly buried in the ground for the sake of a few minutes of pure convenience. That entire cycle ends the moment people genuinely start paying attention. And attention is exactly what you have given this video by watching all the way through to this very point. If this video opened your eyes even just a little bit today, hit that like button one final time, and this time, go ahead and actually subscribe, because there are plenty more brands, more entire industries, and more hidden tricks waiting for us to expose together on this channel. Share this video with the person in your life who drinks the most coffee of anyone you know, because they are the one quietly paying the highest price for not knowing any of this until today. You do not need to boycott every single brand on this list overnight starting tomorrow morning. You simply need to start checking properly from here on out. Read the label carefully. Question the marketing language sitting right in front of you. And the next time you make your morning cup, make absolutely sure it has actually earned its rightful place in your kitchen.